eKaren is at it again. Australia's eSafety Commissioner, Julie Inman Grant, is pushing for yet more social media restrictions. You might recall that in the fading days of the last parliament, the Albanese government pushed for a ban on under 16-year-olds accessing social media. The corollary of which, of course, being that other people would need to identify themselves to be able to access these social media accounts. The ban is due to be rolled out and to be enforced. However, in the lead up to this, Julie Inman Grant, or eKaren as most people refer to her as, is pushing for YouTube to be included in that ban, such that people who are under 16 years old would not be able to access it. The Australian reports that Labor should axe its decision to carve out YouTube from its social media age restrictions, the eSafety Commissioner has advised, intensifying pressure on Communications Minister Annika Wells to reverse the exemption. The recommendation, made by the regulator responsible for enforcing the ban, comes ahead of a National Press Club address by Commissioner Julie Inman Grant on Tuesday, where she will unveil separate obligations on search engines to prevent children from accessing bad material and age-inappropriate material. The social media ban, slated to take effect in December, will require TikTok, Snapchat, Reddit, X and Meta and the subsidiaries of Instagram and Facebook to take reasonable steps to prevent persons under 16 years old of age from creating or holding an account. Now, of course, these age restrictions were always terrible policy. After all, they are likely going to involve the social media companies either requiring ID from people or perhaps trying to use some form of face recognition to gauge someone's age. Something we'd probably prefer not to encourage them to roll out. Clearly, many of these social media companies are already gathering more information, more biometrics on many of their users. But we don't want to encourage them to do so, and certainly we don't want the government to encourage them to do so, because in reality that just leads to the slippery slope towards censorship and ever more government control. Now, YouTube was given the carve-out from the social media age restrictions on the grounds there's a lot of news media on YouTube. For example, just look at 7 News or 9 News or Sky News or ABC or the myriad other news providers. They have various news channels on the platform. Not only that, YouTube, for content creators, often requires you to have an age ID for you to be able to actually access various features as a content creator. And this means there's inherently a little bit of a disincentive for many of the young audience to create a YouTube account for the purpose of monetizing it and creating videos, albeit not one that is necessarily going to stop them doing so. But also, many younger people could actually benefit from being able to view content on YouTube, and even if we go down the slightly odd route of saying that news media is the predominant source of information, well, younger people get access to that news media on YouTube. And this means the age restriction for YouTube never really made very much sense at all. Indeed, I don't think these age restrictions make much sense per se. However, I think they make even less sense for something like YouTube. Add on to this the fact that when people comment on YouTube videos, it's often a specific comment on a piece of content. It's not really a conversation. So it really contrasts with something like Facebook or X or something like Reddit. Now, clearly something like TikTok has some serious similarities to YouTube. So YouTube being carved out, but TikTok not being carved out, that does look a little bit odd. Reading between the lines, it's likely because of the ownership structure of TikTok and the slightly pernicious algorithms that TikTok seems to roll out to prioritize rather trash content. Now, YouTube obviously does a lot of this, but TikTok seems to be an order of magnitude worse. Regardless, we need to have less of these age restrictions, not more. And Julie Inman Grant, eKaren, is going in the wrong direction. Now, it seems that Julie Inman Grant is something of a control freak. She seems to believe that the internet should be censored and the government should be one doing the censoring. She doesn't seem to see a problem with the government taking control over what people see on the internet, which of course is troubling. Just think back to the situation where Bishop Mari Emanuel was attacked. She then attempted to suppress footage of this, not just in Australia, but around the world. That incident was a massive problem, because if the government goes around suppressing primary footage, how do we verify that any of the reporting is correct? Why is it that we should just take at face value what the news media is telling us? Just look at all of the situations where the news media has been sued and successfully sued for defamation. Or look at the ABC shenanigans in relation to some of the SAS footage, which give us all pause about taking anything the news media says at face value. And when the news media lies about something that you know to be the other way, well, it causes you to cease believing anything the news media tells you, or at least to cast a critical eye over any of the reporting. But these issues seem to escape people like Julie Inman Grant, and indeed the government when it suits it, because it appears they want ever more control. Of course, the great irony of this is you have people like Anthony Albanese, who seemingly wanted to lionize censorship and seemingly wanted more government control and seemingly wanted the news media to be the primary source of information, but only when the news media is friendly toward him. When the news media is not friendly toward him, he's perfectly happy to cast aspersions and say they're just never going to support him and they'll always be critical, so you shouldn't believe them. It seems like he wants to have it both ways. He wants the news media to be the only people you listen to, however, only the news media that he happens to like. It's hypocritical in the extreme. People like Julie Inman Grant appear to be cut from the same cloth. They appear to want ever more government control over what people hear. And it's not just the under 16-year-old age restrictions, it's various other things, such as the so-called Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. Now granted, the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill didn't come from Julie Inman Grant, and it didn't come from the eSafety Commissioner or the eKaren office. It came directly from the Albanese government, whereby they attempted to suppress information that they deemed to be misinformation and disinformation. And they operationalized this through a surreptitious way. That is, they operationalized it by trying to deputize social media companies with suppressing so-called misinformation. But the definition of misinformation was so broad and potentially could be left so much up to the opinion of the regulator and up to the regulator's opinion about whether they were taking adequate steps to suppress misinformation and disinformation that it encouraged overreach. In essence, the government seemed to have censorship in its sights. The government seemingly wanted social media companies to suppress more and more information, so they got more control over what people heard. The restrictions on young people accessing social media appear to have some similarities. Now, of course, to be clear, social media can have some negative impacts on young people. These can include things such as cyberbullying, but let's face it, trying to ban social media from young people simply isn't going to work. They'll either use parents' ID to access it, or they'll simply find a workaround. Maybe use a VPN to access social media so they can just get around the social media restrictions. Perhaps the only upside of this is that people will realize that there's so much government overreach that young people might stop trusting government. The fewer people that blindly trust government and blindly take politicians' word at face value and that trust regulators like eKaren, the better. And as soon as young people see the overarching regulation that eKaren and the regulators are bringing in, well, perhaps their trust in government will decrease. But let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below.